There is a phrase in hegemony tactical doctrine, one I memorized at the academy, one I have recited in 3 separate war councils, one I believed with the kind of quiet certainty you reserve for gravity and death: never ask a human for help unless you can afford to lose control of the situation. We asked. We lost control of the situation. What arrived was not a reinforcement wing. It was not a patrol squadron. It was not even a reasonable show of force. What arrived was everything. 47 ships. Carriers. Frigates. One vessel so old its hull classification no longer exists in active military registers. They came out of fold space in a staggered column, engines still singing, and the lead officer, one human, one rifle, one reckless expression I will spend the rest of my career trying to describe accurately in a formal report, opened a channel and said 7 words. 7 words. I will tell you what they were at the end. First, I need to tell you what we did to deserve them. Log entry 4847. Standard time. Meridian Station, Outer Veth Corridor. I write the timestamp because if I do not write the timestamp, I will forget when things happened, and if I forget when things happened, I cannot explain to the Hegemony Review Board exactly how long I had to sit with what I had done before the consequences of it arrived in fold space and rearranged my entire understanding of the word consequences. Let me be precise, I sent the signal at 4:12. The Keth fleet had been parked outside our beacon range for 6 standard days, bleeding us dry with micro-incursions, hit the relay, pull back, hit the fuel depot, pull back, hit the medical transport that we were very specifically not supposed to have because it violated 3 separate armistice clauses, but we had it anyway because Senior Prefect Dobbin has the ethics of a damp ceiling tile. Hit the medical transport. Pull back. Laugh, if Keth laugh. I do not know if Keth laugh. I have never been close enough to find out, and I have been extremely intentional about that. 6 days of this. My crew was down to 53 functional personnel. My secondary power grid was held together by a repair compound that the manifest listed as emergency sealant and my chief engineer described as, and I quote, the kind of thing you use on a boat you don't expect to survive. We had 4 operational weapons platforms, 2 of which had targeting drift I had stopped bothering to correct because the ammunition situation made accuracy something of a theoretical concern. I sent the signal at 4:12 because I had no other options. I want to be very clear that I understood, when I sent it, that requesting human military assistance was a significant commitment. The Hegemony Human Mutual Aid Compact, Article 7, Subsection 3, uses the specific phrase proportional response mobilization, and I had, in my academy training, received approximately 40 minutes of instruction on what that phrase means in practice. 40 minutes. I will tell you what I should have received: 40 days. A full semester. A mandatory counseling component. Perhaps a practical examination in which someone drops a large object on you repeatedly until the lesson integrates at a cellular level. But, 4:12. Signal sent. Done. At 4:17, I received an automated confirmation from the nearest human frontier command relay, which is stationed at Outpost Ven 9, which is, I want to stress, 11 hours away at standard full transit. The confirmation said, request received. Assessing. Fine. 11 hours. We would hold for 11 hours. At 4:31, 19 minutes later, I received a second message. Not automated. Human. A voice is female, flat in the way humans get when they are processing something faster than they can emote about it, which I have learned is actually their version of alarm. Meridian Station, this is Commander Yadel Sorin, HFC Rapid Response. Confirm, you are engaged with a Keth battle group, 7+ vessels, Outer Veth Corridor? I confirmed. There was a pause. 4 seconds. In human social behavior, I have come to understand that 4 seconds is an extremely long time for a pause during military communication. It generally means the other person is looking at something and deciding how to phrase what they're looking at. Confirm your remaining crew count, she said. I told her. Another pause. 3 seconds. She was looking at something else now. Confirm the Keth fleet composition. I told her that too. 1 second pause. Then, stand by, Meridian. That was the last communication I received for 2 hours and 40 minutes, which I spent updating my personal log with the kind of thorough detail one employs when one believes the log may serve as a posthumous record. I wrote about the hum of the failing ventilation. The smell of the sealant, which is not a good smell. Imagine something that was once organic and has made a series of increasingly poor decisions. I wrote about Ensign Tarvel, who is 22 standard years old and has a photograph of her home colony pinned above her console and who had taken to running small probability calculations on her secondary screen in what I recognized as an attempt to quantify hope into something manageable. I wrote that I hoped the calculations were coming out in her favor. At 7:02, Senior Prefect Dobbin, who had spent the previous 2 hours in his sealed command cabin doing something I was not privy to and did not ask about, emerged with a cup of synthesized tea and the expression of a man who had recently convinced himself that everything was fine. "The humans will send a frigate," he said. "2 at most. We'll hold until they arrive. They'll threaten the Keth into the armistice zone." Everyone reports back to command, and I personally receive a commendation for crisis management. I did not respond, because I was watching the fold space sensors. Something was happening to the fold space sensors. I want to explain what fold space emergence looks like from a monitoring station, because I think it is important context. A single ship emerging from full transit creates what we call a pressure ripple, a localized distortion that a trained operator can identify, log, and correlate to vessel mass within a margin of roughly 8%. It is a reliable, well-understood phenomenon. We train on it for 2 weeks in Academy. What was happening to my fold space sensors did not look like a pressure ripple. It looked like the fold space sensors were malfunctioning. I said, out loud, to no one in particular, run a diagnostic on fold space monitoring. Ensign Tarvel ran the diagnostic. She turned around. Her expression was the specific shape of a person delivering information they do not believe. "Sensors are functional," she said. "Confirmed." The prefect said, from behind his tea, "Then, what's 47 ships?" "Not all at once. That is the thing I keep coming back to. They didn't arrive in a single dramatic emergence, no, they came out in waves, each wave staggered by roughly 30 seconds, which I later understood was intentional, a deployment pattern designed to prevent full transit interference between vessels of significant mass, and the fact that they needed a deployment pattern designed to prevent full transit interference between vessels was the first indication that this was not 2 frigates. The first wave, 8 ships. Mid-tonnage carriers, running hot engines not cooled to standard travel configuration, weapons systems already cycling to active status. They came out of fold with the specific urgency of people who had been moving before they arrived. Second wave, 12 ships. Heavier. One of them had a hull configuration I didn't have in my recognition database. I ran an ID query. The query returned a vessel class designation that I had to look up because I had never seen it active. The class had been decommissioned 30 years ago. They had brought back a decommissioned vessel class. Third wave, 11 ships, plus 2 I lost count of because I was still trying to process the second wave. Fourth wave, Prefect, I said. He had put down the tea. Prefect, I need to how many, he said. It was not technically a question. I checked my console. Checked it again. 47 confirmed, with ongoing fold space distortion suggesting additional why, he said. That was also not technically a question. It was more of a sound a person makes when their understanding of a situation collapses faster than language can accommodate. My communications panel lit up. Channel request, human military band, from a vessel now identified as the HFS Constant Forward, which was the lead carrier, which was approximately 4 times the mass of anything else in the corridor and was currently positioning itself between Meridian Station and the Keth fleet with what I can only describe as intention. I accepted the channel. The voice was different from Commander Soren's. Younger. Rough in the way voices get when people have been awake too long and have decided to stop being polite about it. A man. Meridian Station, he said, *, this is Sergeant Major Eli Voss, HFC First Response, 47th Composite. We've got a Keth battle group on our sensors. You've been taking hits for * a pause, presumably consulting something, 6 days. Correct, I said. 6 days. Not a question. Not even a statement with a real end to it. Just the number, sitting there in the channel like he was holding it up and looking at it. Sergeant Major, may I ask? I glanced at the sensor readout, the composition of your response group? Sure, he said. 47 ships. Plus the Meridian. The Meridian was, as I later discovered, the decommissioned vessel class I hadn't recognized. It was also, apparently, named. They had named the decommissioned ship. They had brought it out of a museum storage facility, which, I subsequently learned, was what the second pause from Commander Soren had been about. She had been authorizing the museum storage release and crew it with reservists who had requested the assignment, which is a sentence I am still not fully comfortable with. Sergeant Major, I said carefully, our original distress signal indicated a crew of 53, for operational weapons platforms. Yeah, he said. We know. Our original signal requested proportional response mobilization. Yeah. That phrase, in the compact, is generally understood to mean Meridian Station. Yes. You called for help. A pause. Half a second. The kind of pause that carries actual weight. We came. On my sensor screen, the Keth fleet had stopped moving. All 7 vessels. Dead stop, which is something the Keth do not do in an active engagement. Their tactical doctrine doesn't include dead stops, it includes advance, reinforce, or exit. Dead stop was not in their operating language. Apparently they were learning new vocabulary. Ensign Tarvel was no longer running probability calculations. She was watching the sensor screen with both hands flat on her console and her mouth slightly open, and I thought about what to write in my log, and I thought about the 40 minutes of instruction I had received on human proportional response mobilization, and I thought about how every single fact I had been given in those 40 minutes was technically accurate and also completely useless. Proportional, I would later learn, in the human operational vocabulary, does not mean equivalent. It means sufficient. They had looked at 53 crew, for weapons platforms, 6 days of attrition against a 7-ship Keth battle group, and they had done their own math, and this was what sufficient looked like. I wrote the time in my log, 7:09. I wrote, they came. I left 2 lines blank, because I could not figure out what came after that, and I still can't, and I have been trying for 3 weeks. Entry 4849. 7:31. I should clarify something I may have underrepresented in the previous entry. The Keth battle group had not left. They had stopped. They had not left. This distinction became extremely relevant at 7:22, when the lead Keth vessel, a command carrier, which I will call it by its class designation, a Vethkor, which means approximately throat of the deep in the primary Keth dialect, which is the sort of name you give a warship when you want people to understand that you are serious. The Vethkor opened a broadband channel and transmitted a single-word communication. The translation algorithms rendered it as, withdraw. I spent approximately 8 seconds trying to determine if it was addressed to me or to the human fleet. The human fleet's response was instructive. Nothing. No channel acknowledgement. No return communication. The 47 ships simply continued their deployment into formation around Meridian Station, not an aggressive formation, not a defensive formation exactly, something in between, a shape that seemed to say we are here rather than we are attacking or we are hiding. Like a wall that had opinions. The Vethkor transmitted again. Same word. Still nothing from the humans. I said, to my communications officer, Sub-Lieutenant Wen, are they receiving the Keth transmissions? When checked. Yes, sir. They're reading all channels. So they heard it. They simply chose not to respond. The Keth transmitted a 3rd time, a different word this time, and the translation algorithms gave me final. Which, context of the previous word, presumably meant final warning, but I want to note that the Keth did not say warning. They said final. As if the warning was so obvious it didn't need naming. 7 seconds after the 3rd transmission, Sergeant Major Voss opened his channel to me again. Station, what's your weapon situation right now? Full picture. I gave him the full picture. For platforms, targeting drift on 2, ammunition constraints, secondary grid instability, the sealant situation. He listened without interrupting, which humans often don't do when they're busy, and then, he said, "Okay. Don't fire anything. Even if something shoots at you, don't fire anything. Sergeant Major, that is with respect, not standard defensive protocol." "Yeah. Can you do it anyway?" I looked at Ensign Tarvel, who was already looking at me, and, in her expression was the very specific face of a junior officer who has just understood something her superior hasn't caught yet. She had good instincts. I had noticed this about her. "I can do it," I said. "Good." He closed the channel. At 7:29, the Vethkor fired. Not at Meridian Station. At the closest human carrier, the HFS Steady Resolve, which was positioned approximately 20 kilometers off our port side and had, as far as my sensors could tell, been sitting completely still and doing nothing provocative whatsoever. The shot was a ranging pulse. Keth standard, they send a low-power targeting burst before committing to a full weapons solution, which is a tactical habit I have always found philosophically interesting because it gives the target a chance to react, which either confirms they're afraid or reveals their defensive configuration. The Keth collect information even when they're threatening. The Steady Resolve did not move. The Steady Resolve did not return fire. The Steady Resolve sent a communication, not to the Keth, to Voss, on a channel I was now monitoring because I had stopped pretending that not monitoring it was a dignified choice. "Voss, they pinged us." "Voss, back, yeah. You want us to *? No. We're just going to * sit there." A pause. Then, from the Steady Resolve's communications officer, a man whose voice had the quality of someone who has done this before and finds it entertaining in retrospect, "Right. Sitting." The Keth fleet sat with this for 43 seconds. I counted. I am, as previously noted, a man who writes down timestamps, and I want this on record: 43 seconds of a Keth battle group staring at 47 human ships that had been shot at and done absolutely nothing. I have engaged the Keth twice in my career. They are not easily unsettled. They are patient, deliberate, and they commit to a course of action with the kind of full organizational weight that makes watching them operate feel like watching a geological event. You do not hurry the Keth. You do not bait the Keth. You especially do not shoot a ranging pulse at a human carrier and, then, watch the carrier do nothing and come away from that experience feeling comfortable. They fired a second ranging pulse. Different carrier this time. The HFS Long Patience, which I would later learn was a name with some history behind it, which explained why the crew of the Long Patience responded to being shot at by doing nothing with what I can only describe as a practiced ease. Nothing again. On my internal crew channel, I heard Ensign Tarvel say, very quietly, to no one in particular, "They're making themselves look harmless." I turned around. "Ensign." She caught herself. "Sorry, sir." I was just, "No," I said. "Say it again." She blinked. They're making themselves look harmless. The Keth are trying to read their threat profile. Whether they'll shoot back, how fast, how hard. And, the humans they're not giving them anything. Every time the Keth probe, they get nothing back, and you can't build a threat assessment on nothing, so the Kether, she paused, they don't know what they're dealing with. I considered this. I considered the size of the fleet outside. I considered the decommissioned museum ship that someone had looked at and thought, yes, bring that. They know what they're dealing with, I said. They just can't quantify it. And there is something, I have learned, about the unknown that unsettles the Keth worse than a known threat. The Keth plan. They are extraordinary planners. Show them a weapons profile, a crew count, a tactical posture, and they will build you a battle model in 4 minutes that accounts for 6 contingencies and a fallback. But, show them nothing, show them 47 ships that got shot at and shrugged, and the model doesn't build. The variables don't resolve. The Keths are deeply uncomfortable with variables that don't resolve. At 8:01, Voss opened my channel again. Commander, sorry, what's your rank? Senior Tactical Officer. Rank equivalent of Lieutenant Commander in your system. Okay. LT. What does the Keth formation look like right now? I checked my sensors. They have contracted slightly. The outer vessels have moved closer to the Veth core. Defensive reorganization, potentially. Right. A sound on his end, like he was setting something down on a metal surface. You got a read on their communication traffic? Volume has increased significantly in the last 10 minutes. Good. Is it good? They're talking to each other a lot. Yes. People talk to each other a lot when they're not sure what to do next. I thought about this. I wrote it in my log because I was going to want it later. Then, I said, you have done this before. He said, define this. This specific, I looked at my screen, at the 47 ships, at the Keth fleet that had fired 2 warning shots and received 2 unresponsive silences and was now apparently holding an internal conference about what that meant. This. Waiting. Showing them the shape of something they can't measure. He said, we call it standing ground. You're not standing ground. You haven't moved. You haven't spoken. You haven't done anything since you arrived except exist in very large numbers. A pause. I heard something in the background of his channel, another voice, brief, and then, something that sounded like a short laugh. Not a happy laugh. The kind that acknowledges something true. Yeah, he said. That's the move. At 8:17, something happened that my tactical training did not have a category for. One of the humans went for a walk. I mean this literally. The HFS Long Patience launched a single personnel shuttle, small, unarmed, moving at roughly 1/3 standard transit speed, and this shuttle crossed the gap between the human fleet perimeter and Meridian Station and docked at our secondary access bay. The Keth tracked it. Of course they tracked it. It was the first movement anyone on the human side had made in 47 minutes. I met the shuttle at the bay. There were 3 humans. 2 of them were carrying equipment cases and moved with the specific efficiency of technicians who have a list and intend to get through it. The third was a woman, tall, gray-streaked hair pulled back in the way people wear their hair when aesthetics stopped being a priority roughly a decade ago, wearing a jacket that had enough patches and rank markers on it that I could have spent several minutes decoding it and still not been certain I had the full picture. She looked at me. She looked at the bay. She looked at the sealant residue on the nearest wall, which was extensive and, frankly, not something I had prioritized visually. Officer? Senior Tactical Officer Len, Hegemony Meridian Station. Commander Yad El Soren. She extended a hand, and I took it, because I have been around enough humans to know what the handshake means, and declining it at this moment would have been the kind of social error that ends up in someone's incident report. You have engineering issues. We have several engineering issues. Start with the most dangerous one. I started with the secondary power grid. One of her technicians had already opened the access panel before I finished the sentence. This is the thing I could not have predicted, and the thing I keep returning to in the days since, while 46 ships held position outside, running a silence-based psychological operation on a Keth battle group. 1 ship sent 3 people to fix our ventilation coupling and run a diagnostic on our targeting drift and replace 2 power relay units that had been on the maintenance request log for 8 months. 8 months. I asked Commander Soren, while her technicians worked, whether the Keth were likely to fire on the shuttle. She said, would you fire on a maintenance shuttle? In an active engagement, would you? I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. No, I admitted. It would be strange. Disproportionate. It would look uncertain. She nodded like I had answered correctly, like this was a lesson she had expected me to reach on my own and was glad I had managed it. They won't fire on the shuttle, she said. And we know they won't fire on the shuttle. So we're fixing your station in front of them. And every minute we spend fixing your station in front of them is a minute they're watching us act like this situation is already resolved. It isn't resolved. No, she said. But they're starting to think it might be. At 9:44, the Veth core moved backward. A full reverse burn, 40,000 kilometers, pulling the rest of the Keth battle group with it in a staggered withdrawal that took 11 minutes to complete. not a retreat. Keth doctrine doesn't formally include retreat, they call it reorientation, which is a word that does a lot of heavy lifting, but a movement that put the Keth fleet outside standard engagement range and held them there. On the bridge channel, I heard the communications officer from the Steady Resolve say, "Voss, they're backing off." And, "Voss, back, yeah. You want us to advance?" "No. We're just going to sit here." Another pause. And then, from the Steady Resolve, something I didn't hear clearly, muffled, followed by a sound that carried through the channel despite being directed away from the mic, and I am fairly certain it was laughter. Commander Soren was on her third cup of synthesized station coffee, which she had obtained by asking Ensign Tarvel where the galley was and helping herself, and she was reading something on a small personal pad while her technicians finished the power relay. She did not look up when the Keth moved. I said, "Commander." "I heard," she said. "They've withdrawn to outside engagement range." "I know." "Does this mean?" "It means," she said, setting down the pad, "that they spent 2 hours trying to figure out what we would do and couldn't, and now they're going to go have a much longer conversation about whether this corridor is worth whatever we apparently are." She drained the coffee. Made a face. "God, this is terrible. It is an energy-based synthesis compound. We have been out of actual coffee for 11 days. She looked at the cup. Then, at me. 11 days. It has been a difficult 11 days. She put the cup down with the deliberateness of someone who has decided not to comment on something. Your grid is fixed. Targeting drift should be corrected. Tell your ops officer to run a calibration cycle before she trusts it. And your sealant situation is, she glanced at the wall, still a situation, but it's not a crisis situation. It's a cosmetic situation. Thank you. She picked up her pad. Don't thank me yet. The Keth will be back. Not today. Maybe not for a month. But the corridor is strategically significant and they're patient. I know. When they come back, there will be more of them. I know that too. She finally looked up from the pad, directly at me, with an expression I found difficult to read. Not unkind. Something older than kind. If you call again, she said, we'll come again. I wrote this in my log at 9:51. I wrote it exactly as she said it. Then, I wrote the next thing she said, which was, just maybe, and then, she picked up her equipment case, and the technicians picked up theirs, and she said something brief to Ensign Tarvel that made Tarvel stand slightly straighter, the way people do when someone unexpected has said something good about them, and then, they walked back to the shuttle. I stood in the access bay and watched the shuttle return to the long patience. Then, I went back to the bridge and wrote down the timestamp. Log entry 4851. 3 weeks later. I have been asked to submit a formal after-action report to the Hegemony Joint Command regarding the Keth engagement at Meridian Station, the human military response, and my assessment of the Compact's proportional response clause as exercised during the incident. I have been working on this report for 12 days. It is currently 47 pages long, and I am not finished, and the reason it is not finished is that I keep arriving at the section titled Assessment of Human Military Response and finding that I do not have a professional vocabulary adequate to what happened, and I have been trying to solve this problem by adding more pages, which is not solving the problem. Senior Prefect Davin submitted his own report. I was not shown it. I suspect this is because it awards him the commendation for crisis management he mentioned on the morning the fleet arrived, and someone in command was courteous enough not to put that in front of me. The Keth did not come back in the first 2 weeks. I do not know if this means the corridor assessment shifted or if it means they are patient, as Commander Soren said, and I find that I have started thinking about this question more than is useful. Ensign Tarvel was promoted. Sublieutenant when put in a transfer request for a frontier posting, which I approved, which means he wants to be closer to humans, or to conflict, or to both. I understand the impulse. I do not know if it is wisdom. My power grid is stable. The targeting drift is corrected. The secondary sealant is still visible on the portside wall of the access corridor, but I have stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar you've had long enough. I still have not written the 7 words in my report. Let me write them here first. In the hour before the Keth withdrew, when the silence had stretched long enough that the Keth fleet's internal traffic was at its highest volume, they were, according to our signals intercept, in the middle of something that translated roughly as a command-level review, which in Keth tactical doctrine is what happens when the senior officers are not in agreement about what to do next. Sergeant Major Voss opened a channel to the Keth Vethkor directly. Not to me. Not to Commander Soren. Directly to the Keth command ship, on their primary military channel, without any of the standard hegemony interspecies communication protocols, without requesting an interpreter, without clearing it with anyone that I am aware of. I know this because I was monitoring every channel. The Keth opened the channel in return. This is, itself, notable. The Keth have a practiced habit of letting human direct communication go unanswered for several minutes as a display of relative urgency calibration, which is a sophisticated way of saying they make you wait to establish who has more time. They did not wait. They opened the channel. There were 3 seconds of the specific quality of silence that happens when 2 parties are both listening and neither wants to speak first. Voss spoke first. I had the translation algorithms running. I do not know exactly what his words sounded like in the Keth dialect, because the algorithm translates into my language, not out of it, but I have the original human phrasing logged, and the 7 words were, "You already know how this ends." That was it. 7 words. No threats. No weapons system cycling, no formal declaration, no demands. Nothing after it. The channel stayed open for 19 seconds of silence. Then, the Keth closed it. For minutes later, the Vethkor began its reverse burn. I have been trying to write the assessment section of my report for 12 days because I do not know how to assess this in terms that the Hegemony Joint Command will find actionable. The human response to our distress signal was not disproportionate in the sense of being irrational or undisciplined. It was, I have slowly understood, exactly calibrated to a different measurement than the one I was using. Not equivalent to the threat. Equivalent to the question. The question the Keth were asking when they spent 6 days bleeding us with micro-incursions was not, can we defeat Meridian Station? They knew the answer to that. They were asking something more significant. What is the cost of taking this corridor, and is anyone going to make the cost too high to pay? 47 ships. A decommissioned museum vessel crewed by reservists who volunteered. 3 technicians sent across an active engagement zone to fix a power relay. And 7 words that did not threaten, did not promise, did not describe. They only stated what the Keth already knew. I am not a student of human psychology or military doctrine. I am a logistics and tactical officer who has served on Meridian Station for 9 years and who writes timestamps in his logs because it grounds him in a universe that sometimes moves faster than he can track. I am not qualified to make large pronouncements. But I have been trying to find the word for what the humans did, and I keep arriving at the same one, which is not a tactical term, and I cannot put it in an official report, and I am going to put it here instead, in a personal log that no review board will read. The word is familiar. Not familiar as in comfortable. Familiar as in the Keth had done their threat assessment, had modeled their variables, had asked their question, how much will this cost, and the humans had been in this situation before, enough times, in enough corridors, with enough insufficient stations and 2 small crews and 6-day attritions, that they had learned what the question actually was and how to answer it before it needed explaining. They had been the Meridian Station. Many times. Enough times that when someone sent the signal, they knew exactly how many ships was enough without calculating it. They just came. The last thing I will write in this entry, and then I will try to write the formal report again, is something Commander Soren said before she finished her terrible coffee and took her technicians back to the shuttle. I asked her, and I realize, in retrospect, this was not a professional question, it was a personal one, which is a distinction I usually manage more carefully. I asked her why she had come herself. Not why the fleet came. Why she had come. Why the commander of a response wing had taken a personnel shuttle across an active engagement corridor to supervise a power relay repair personally. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, she said something I didn't write in my log at the time because I wasn't sure how to log it. I'm writing it now. She said, "You waited 6 days before you called." I said, yes. She said, that's a long time to hold on your own. She wasn't talking about tactics. I understood that. She wasn't talking about the power grid or the weapons platforms or the sealant situation. She was talking about the thing that precedes all of those things, the 47 minutes of not sending the signal, the 6 days of smaller decisions, all the small violences of trying to hold something together when you do not have enough to hold it with. She said it the way someone says a thing that isn't a comfort but is a recognition, which is sometimes more than comfort, and sometimes harder. I said, I wasn't sure you'd come. She picked up her case. And she said the thing she had said before, if you call again, we'll come again, and then she walked to the shuttle, and I wrote it down, and I am still writing it down. 47 ships. Not because we had 47 ships worth of station. Because somewhere in the human operational vocabulary, sufficient and enough are not words that describe the minimum. They describe the amount past which the question stops being asked. I am going to file my report tomorrow. I am going to leave out the part about the coffee and the 7 words and Commander Soren's face when she looked at the sealant wall. Those are not after-action material. They belong somewhere else. They belong here. Log entry closed, 2314. Senior Tactical Officer Len, Meridian Station, Outer Veth Corridor. P.S. The Keth, as of this writing, have not returned. Ensign Tarvel told me this morning that she thinks they will not come back, and, when I asked why, she said, because they know how it ends. I wrote the time. I did not write what I thought about it. Some things you just let sit.